Hi, Gloria Lybecker here with Healing You. I was looking back over my journals and my writings, and I ran across the first article that I wrote in regards to parenting. I remember at the time it took a lot of courage because I had what I called writer's block. I was petrified of putting my own self out there in the world and really afraid of what other people might think or say or do in response to me. And so it's taken a lot of empathy sessions and a lot of courage building, laying down new pathways within myself to get to the point where I was willing to do that. And that was back in 2010. So a few years have gone by and lots of resonant empathy sessions for Gloria, for which I'm eternally grateful. I wanted to come back around though. I've got six beautiful grandchildren that I just love so much. And it always has me coming back around to what it's like to be in relationships of trust, or how to grow those relationships of trust, and how important it is to be as present as possible with our children and with any children and with one another. So I want to come back around and I want to share with you some of the musings from this first article that I wrote. It was dedicated to all those people in the world who care for children and others that show up differently, that they have special needs. I like to call it that we're all on the same spectrum of human life. And it's a very wide spectrum. And wanting to create a place where there can be community, that you'd be welcome just as you are, that there'd be resonant support and lots of mutuality and reciprocal exchanges, and there'd be heart connection. And gosh, that just allows you to just relax into being who you came here to be. As I stepped into this kind of community, it was through being with my youngest son, who had high sensory processing difficulties, that I found the book Nonviolent Communication, which introduced me to some of my most close friends that I have that became lifelong empathy buddies. And I'm also exploring interpersonal neurobiology, or relational neuroscience, to understand what happens inside of our brains and our bodies in order to develop the capacity for more resiliency. And so these ways of being inform and actually transform my parenting and all of my relationships, especially my relationship with myself. So long time ago, let me tell you a story here. My little guy was given a diagnosis when he was only in first grade of a math disability. And I didn't even know, even though I was a therapist, a counselor, that diagnosis even existed. Part of the test that he went through, though, for him to get this diagnosis, was the test revealed that he had a lack of working memory, which is really critical in order to compute math problems. But I didn't find out until the end of that year that he had been having an ongoing experience with learning math by being put in isolation and having a timer on his desk. And the thinking his teacher had at that time was that it would help him focus on his math work because he was slower than the other students. And no one was allowed to talk to him until he was completed with his task. But his system was just really anxious to begin with. And it was exceptionally anxious when it was separated from any warm and caring relationships. So even then, 4 years after that, just hearing the word subtraction, he would go into a type of panic, full-blown panic attack, and the deeply ingrained experience of overwhelming helplessness would fall upon him. So we slow down and we look at that experience of stress that he had through the lens of relational neuroscience. We can start to have an idea of what's happening in the brain and in the nervous system. So the repeated experience of panic sends a flood of hormones that shifts instantaneously any person into survival mode. And one of those hormones that's released is cortisol, and that inhibits the hippocampus. So if we have the brain in the palm of the hand, here's the brain stem. This is, I'm getting myself all mixed up. This is where the spinal cord comes up into the brain stem, and then the limbic system comes across. And the limbic system is our emotional alarm system. At the end of it is a part that's called the hippocampus. It's like our date stamper. And if it goes offline, then all of our experience just shunts down into our body, and our amygdala remembers everything in the moment, but we don't have conscious memory of it. But if the emotional alarm system goes off, then this part that comes over the limbic system is called the cortex. And this is where our seat of creativity and our capacity for warmth and emotion comes in, even our critical thinking. And if we flip our lid because our emotional alarm system goes off, we don't have access to our learning capacity. So it's like danger, danger, danger. So we flip our lid when we sense danger, because their emotional alarm system went off. Children really need accompaniment. All humans need accompaniment, but children especially need accompaniment to come in when they flip their lid and help them to come back to safety, come back to calm, by having a warm, caring, resonant other that stays interested in their experience so they can make meaning and make sense out of it. So it's really hard to stay calm and solve problems if your primitive impulse for fight, flight, and freeze is activated, because then what's activated is survival. So when he would go into that survival mode, I was learning, and he was learning through experience with me, to practice interrupting that pattern when he would perceive danger. We want to be able to create new neural patterns using fresh experiences so the old patterns can fall away in time. So how this would look way back then was I would respond with spontaneity and creativity in the face of his triggered reactions, and doing my best to track what his needs might be in the moment, and holding always an intention for heart connection and presence. And this is something I was beginning to be able to do back in 2010, after having been held with lots and lots of resonant empathy support and practicing self-empathy, in order to widen not only my window of tolerance, but to be able to welcome whatever emotion may come up within the relationship with my son, especially when he had stress and panic. So once the pattern of panic is gently interrupted, then Rylan, my son's prefrontal cortex, restarts, and another hormone begins to drip down. It's GABA. It calms the emotional alarm system, brings the hippocampus back online, which is also known as our cognitive mapper, because it assembles all the bits of information into memories. And with these pieces in place, then he would be able to take in new information and begin to learn. So that day, we were sitting across from one another at the kitchen table, and we had just completed a section working with number families, adding to find the big number. So as I turned the page, I was reading to Rylan, number families also show you how to write subtraction problems. I heard a loud gasp, and I stopped reading, and I looked up to see Rylan's eyes and mouth opened wide, and his eyebrows had shot up, and he had lifted his arm to throw his pencil. And suddenly he paused in the middle of that, and his eyes momentarily shifted to mine, and then he threw the pencil anyway. So I jumped off of my chair and I clapped, and I was so happy and joyful. And I said, Rylan, do you know what I just observed? And this was a strategy that I had to derail the perceived danger. He's like, no. He was surprised and rather confused expression. And I saw his body shift a little and relax a little. And that was an indication that his system was starting to come back to calm alert. I said, I saw you pause. And for just a moment, right before you threw that pencil, And I find that so fascinating. I was wondering, what was happening for you then? Did you notice that moment when you paused too? I asked him. And he reflected for a moment, and he answered with a frown, yeah, I paused, and then I threw that pencil anyway. I said, wow, you noticed that? You paused too? That is so exciting. You've developed your own pause button. High five, dude. It was so fun. We high-fived, and then I sang out a song that we had learned when we'd gone to family camp. Yay, Ryland, celebrate Ryland, sing it with an open, grateful heart. Yay, Ryland, celebrate Ryland, sing it with an open heart. And as I sang, I danced around the table to take his hands in mine, inviting him to join me in celebration. And together we sang the song again. But this time he spontaneously changed the lyrics to Yay, Gloria, celebrate Gloria. And we ended our dance with a warm hug. So then I asked him, hey, how do you imagine that moment might look different now? So this is what I call a redo or a rewind or a post-rehearsal. So Ronan walked over, picked up his pencil and sat back at the table. Then he lifted his arm to throw the pencil using the same facial expressions and noise, and then he paused, and his face broke into a great big old grin. And he calmly lowered his arm and said, now, where were we again, Mom? Subtraction number families? So in the midst of difficult moments, we've been, at that time, we're just beginning to experience that the practice of repetition, of interrupting, makes more space for both of us to find our way back to connection and presence. And it creates more compassion and self-awareness for the child as they are developing through their relationship. It's grounded in trust. So our long-term goal was to have an ongoing neuroception of safety so that he would be able to develop the internal resources to slow things down, and to see options even when he was stressed or triggered. And so again, the brain in the palm of the hand, when the child flips their lid, they need a surrogate prefrontal cortex that stays calm and present and curious and warm in relationship to come and support them to find their way back to regulation. Because internalized regulation is always co-regulation first. They end up having an internalized mom or dad or caregiver that takes the time to stay in relationship rather than moving to strategy. So once we have connection and presence that links us together, then you can take what I call, and you can rewind time and go back and then play it out. See what could be different. Be creative, be spontaneous, and follow the lead of your child. I've really loved experiencing how choosing to stay heart connected and present in relationship with my son has really provided him with a radically different model for learning, especially when many people perceive him as having special needs. Learning can only take place when it's both physically and emotionally safe to take in new information. And you have the freedom to learn at your own rhythm, your own pace. We each develop our own rhythm of attachment. Have you ever noticed what your rhythm of attachment is? So creating a neuroception of safety is the first step, and it's only possible when you have consistent support in order to provide your child with the support they need to find their way back to regulation in the face of stress. If you're in need of any resources or would like to join part of community that practices this, reach out to me at healingyousanctuary.com. Thanks for being on this journey with me today. Healing you.